Joining us today is a true Renaissance man. He's a wrestler, a comedian, an actor, a commentator, an entrepreneur. The man can do it all and has done it all. Colt Cabana is here today. Thanks for joining us, Colt. How's it going?
Oh, very nice. I like that introduction. Thank you very much. A Renaissance man. That would make me Danny DeVito, right? Is that who the Renaissance man was?
That's it. Well, before we get into it, how happy are you about the Chicago Cubs getting into the World Series?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me how happy I was for Danny DeVito, which I don't know. Dude, I am stoked. And what's crazy is I was wrestling for Ring of Honor in Florida when they got into the World Series. And, this is a thing. I've been going to games since I was a child. My mother, who's 70 years old, she made me a Cubs fan. I would come home from school every day, and she would always be watching the games, and she's been going since she was a child. So, to be able to see them get into the World Series it's giving me goosebumps right now. So I was a little sad that I was wrestling, but I've made sure Friday. I actually took a day off of work of professional wrestling on Friday for the Cubs' first game in Chicago, the World Series. I can't go to the game, but I'm going to be around Wrigleyville, and I'm super excited. The whole city is super excited.
What really blows my mind is that Back to the Future was a year off in that, to where if it would have happened last year, that would have been really something. But nonetheless, I hope they win it all. So, but why you're here because Wrestling Road Diaries 3 is on the way. After the success of Wrestling Road Diaries 1 and 2, which is a documentary films that chronicle life on the road as independent wrestlers, your newest title, Wrestling Road Diaries 3: Funny Equals Money, featuring yourself, Scottish star Grado, and Japan's Kikutaro, available to ship on November 6th and also on streaming on November 16th at digitalcolt.com. What was it like to be on the road with these guys while filming, and what can the fans expect from the DVD?
Yeah, so this is, obviously the first two were so successful. The first one, I think, the most, because it had Daniel Bryan literally a couple months before he went to WWE and then became the mythological legend that he became, Yep. But did I screw it up? Mythological? There it is. But yeah, the series that we've done was because in my head, I've been on the independent wrestling scene now. This is my 18th year in the indies, and you just hear the word indies, but no one's ever really, really documented how our lifestyle is and what it is. And so that's what the original one was Daniel Bryan and I had been doing so many weird indies over the years, and no one really knew the life except the people in that world. So that was our idea to document it. And then from there, it was so successful, I decided to start making some more. And so the third one is about comedy wrestling, comedy in wrestling, comedic wrestlers. And I consider myself that for a long time now. And I can go back and forth because I'm pretty versatile in the ring. But that's my true love, is making people laugh while wrestling professionally. And there's two other people in my head that are the greatest at this also, that are unsigned and uncontracted, and that's Grado from Scotland and Kikutaro from Japan. And of course, Kikutaro is a legend. He's a legend in Japan for this style of comedy wrestling, including doing comedy matches in front of 50,000 people at the Tokyo Dome and Budokan Hall and stuff. So we traveled around, and that part enough is funny because it's three silly, goofy guys, but also we dissect how comedy wrestling is, how it works, and why it works, and how sometimes it looks like it could just be simple to do, but you really have to be really talented and skilled in order to become a comedy wrestler, which I know sounds weird, but it's really true. It's a hard art to do.
Definitely. Now, how long were you guys together on the road to film this? And what about these kind of documentaries is, would you say, the most difficult about doing them?
We did a long weekend, so I think it was 5 days traveling around. And, the first one was 10 days. Wrestling Road Diaries 1 was 10 days. The second one was maybe 5 or 6. And this one was 5. I don't know if it's hard for me. I produced it in terms of I brought the guys over. I kind of had a vision. But Jack Ettinger is the guy who filmed it with us and edited it. And he's really the unsung hero of this whole thing. So he's a filmographer out of Chicago. He works with a lot of bands, and he also works with freelance wrestling in Chicago. So You know, it's kind of like my idea of like, hey, let's try to document this, let's try to story this, and I'll get different parts and different pieces. But he's really he's the puzzle man at the end of the day.
Sure. Now, a lot of fans know you, of course. Some people have gotten to know Grado briefly while he was on TNA, but was there much of a learning curve for both of them, for Grado and Kikutaro, while touring that weekend? Did their comedy translate well with American fans, or was there any problem with that?
That's a good question, because Grado wrestled Tracy Smothers in one of the weirdest matches of all time in Cleveland for AIW. And that's the fun part, is we document that, you know. So, and that's part of it. It's like, not all these jokes aren't going to hit. And there's some weird stuff in that, and that's part of the movie. And I had some stuff too that didn't really hit that well. So it's not just those guys. But yeah, there's some hits and some misses. And so, like, you know, this movie isn't like, here's the best of comedy wrestling.
Yeah.
It's here's what works and what doesn't work. And so there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work. And we show that too.
Definitely. Now,
I shouldn't. I have, at the end of the day, the most control, and I shouldn't let my stuff that bombs be on the movie, but I do for the sake of the piece, you know?
Sure, definitely. Now, do you think comedy is missing in today's wrestling world, or is there just enough, or is there room enough for more?
Oh, I think there's almost maybe too much now. Like, well, at least on the indie scene, you know, it's because I always listen. I think WWE and the indie scene are two completely different animals. They're not the same, I don't think, and they sell different things. And we talk about this a little bit in the movie, but you know, I started in '99, and so when I kind of started to like really understand what I was doing in wrestling, say 2003, 2004. What I was doing wasn't being done on shows, trying to make people laugh. You know, that was the scene of like a lot of people were emulating Japanese wrestling on the indie scene. Low Key was like the big deal, and the way he hit people. And so the idea of me trying to make people laugh wasn't really a thing on the American indie scene. So that's when I started to really like, okay, I want to get as good as I can at this because nobody's doing it. And as that time has passed, like you come to a lot of these shows. And now there's whole shows based on that. There's a promotion in Ohio called Old Time Wrestling. And, you know, Chikara has a lot of that instilled in it, if not most of it. So I think there is a lot, but I don't think there's a lot of great comedy wrestling. And there's always room for great any kind of wrestling. But comedy happens to be my favorite.
When you began training at the Steel Domain in Chicago, your trainers were Ace Steel and Danny Dominion. At that point, when you started training, did you know you wanted to be a comedic wrestler, or did that come later on?
No, not at all. Yeah, that's funny. I was telling someone the other day, like, Ace and Danny thought I was like a mute. Like, they didn't think I knew how to talk. Because, you know, when I came to the school, like, all I wanted to do was be a wrestler, and I understood the idea of respect, and I understood the idea that I didn't know what I was doing, and these guys do, and I'm paying them money to teach me. So it's not my job to start talking, or you know, my only job is to listen, and that's what I did. And then kind of when I started coming to my own, they're like, well, where did this come from? And I was like, well, now I feel comfortable around you, and I didn't before. So I kind of went in very like a fresh piece of clay, I guess, you know, like I was like, here's me. I love wrestling. Mold me and teach me how to do this. And they did. And then, you know, I would say it took me about 5 years to kind of get good at the basics and get good who I was, and then to really understand what I was doing with my art. And then at that point, I was able to then kind of go off the track, or the beaten path, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important for everyone. You know, you need a real good foundation. And I always kind of say a phrase. I don't have it correctly, but I'll try to remember what it is off the top of my head. Is like, in order to break the rules, you got to know the rules. You know. So, and that's kind of what I kind of did. Is like, I do break a lot of rules as a comedic wrestler, and I do that because I know the rules and I know them really well.
Now, being what we like to call the founding father of wrestling podcasts with the art of wrestling, you've also helped launch Pro Wrestling Tees into a bigger market. Did you ever imagine how influential you would become being on the outside of the big companies? Meaning, you know, did you ever think anyone could have ever done that much without being on a national platform to start with?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And, you know, it's funny, before I got signed with WWE, when I got signed with WWE, I took a pay cut. And not saying I was making a lot of money as an independent wrestler, but as the bottom tier of a WWE wrestler, I wasn't making that much money. And, you can go back and look what those guys were making as a developmental wrestler in 2007. So I knew that, like, I could make a living as an independent wrestler. So I'm not saying that I knew that there was tons of money out there or whatever it might be, but I knew, like, the idea of kind of being, quote unquote famous on the independent scene was a thing. Like, you didn't need to have to go to big time arena wrestling in order to make a living or get by. So, obviously when I got fired from the WWE, like, that was my goal, was to try to recreate that and do that. And so, am I surprised there's such a big market? I'm not surprised. I'm almost surprised that I figured out how to tap into it, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, because I just did what I like to do, and I loved in 2009. I loved podcasts. I loved them so much. Nobody was really doing the wrestler to wrestler podcast, or the wrestler to wrestler in podcast. They were doing it in comedy, and I was loving that genre, and I just couldn't wait for them to do it in wrestling. So I started it. Just thinking this was something that I loved. I bet this is something other people would love. And then also, you can go back years and people will always tell you that I was one of the original guys on the gimmick tables, always selling merch. And I did that because I was trying to make a living. Like, I'd rather, if I could try to sell a couple more t-shirts or a couple more pictures, then I didn't have to go do a job from 9 to 5 and I could sustain this wrestling lifestyle that I've tried to, learn to do. So it's almost like I took that idea of that, the gimmick table at a show, and then with the help of Ryan at 1 Hour Tees, together we made an internet gimmick table for everybody.
Yeah,
and that's why it's successful. So it's not like, it's funny because I have a business degree, but it's not like I went like, business plan, this is how you do it. It was just like,
yeah,
here's what I like. Let's hey, let's see if other people are down with it. If not, whatever. Like, even if a couple people are into it, that's a success. But it turns out like a lot of people have been into it.
Definitely.
Both pro wrestling team and the podcast genre,
Definitely. Now, you've mentioned before in interviews that your earliest memory of pro wrestling was seeing Andre the Giant get his hair chopped off by Big John Studd and Ken Patera. That happened to be right here in our very own backyard of Poughkeepsie, New York, where we actually saw you compete earlier this year for Global Force Wrestling. Did you happen to know that was the arena where it happened when you wrestled there?
Yeah, when I met you guys there, I did, and someone had told me that, and it was kind of gave me chills looking back at it. I love that I get to wrestle in these venues with all this history. It's so fun to me, and that was amazing. And like wrestling at a Korakuen Hall in Japan, mm-hmm. and you can just go on YouTube and see all the legendary battles. You see Brody, you see Hanson and Gordy and Dr. Death going through the exact same Korakuen Hall that that I would wrestle in, and like, to me that's so romantic. And in Croydon, I wrestled in Croydon in England for All Star Wrestling, Fairfield Hall, and like, you go back and you could look and you could see Mark Rocco and Johnny Saints, and you could see Haystacks and Big Daddy, and like, you're just like, man, I'm in the same locker room these guys were in. I'm in the same ring. And the same idea of like, they sold tickets to watch you as a performer. So
it's like you came full circle, right? From seeing it on TV to actually being there now.
Or like, it's a real, like, no matter how, like, if you think your career is awful or whatever it might be, it's like a real, like, shot in the arm. It's like, hey, you're doing the same thing that these guys did. And so it's something to be proud of.
Now, Wrestling Road Diaries 3, available to ship on November 6th and for streaming on November 11th at digitalcolt.com. Do you have any future plans for Wrestling Road Diaries 4 in the early stages?
Oh, well, like, no. But a little bit of me wants to do, Marty DeRosa and I do comedy, and where we watch bad or weird or obscure wrestling, and we have a comedy show based on that. I'd like to tour that. We've done that as a tour, and I'd like to maybe film that. Or I'd like to do one international, too, like possibly Japan or possibly England. But they're so... If you've noticed, for the most part, all the Wrestling Road Diaries have been in my car within the Midwest or driving region. That way we can keep costs down. So that would be a big cost to overtake. But I mean, as long as people keep buying and they stay away from, doing it in illegal ways, and that's why takedownpiracy.com is there to help. But as long as we can fund that, then like, if that's possible, I'd love to be able to do that.
Definitely. Well, Colt Cabana, we thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure they already know where, but could you just let everybody know where they can find you and find the videos, find the merch and all that?
Yeah, everything is like my hub is coltcabana.com. You can go see me. You can go see me. Come see. I'll be there shaking hands and signing babies. But my Twitter and my Instagram is @Colt Cabana. And then all my merchandise is at coltmerch.com, including the Wrestling Road Diaries, which I'm so proud of. And we're pre-sailing now. You can buy it now. If you buy it now with limited, while supplies last, there's a free autographed cover card of the DVD of me, Grado, Kikutaro that we all signed, and then we'll put that in for free if you buy it online.
Well, thank you so much, Cole. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks so much. I'm glad that we finally get to do this too. I appreciate it.